Hi everyone, today I'm going to tell you the one true story. Please support me by liking and subscribing. Thanks, are you ready? Here we go. The night was oppressive. The road stretched out before them, an endless expanse of black asphalt illuminated only by the weak beam of the car's headlights. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, trying to ignore the eerie feeling that had settled over him the moment they had entered the stretch of road known as Black Hollow Highway. His wife, Claire, sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the endless darkness ahead, her face pale in the flickering light. Their daughter, Lily, was asleep in the back seat, the quiet of the car broken only by the hum of the tires against the pavement. "I told you we shouldn't have taken this route," Claire murmured, her voice barely rising above a whisper. Marcus tried to reassure her, though his own unease was growing. "It's just a shortcut. We'll be there in no time." But deep down, Marcus knew something wasn't right. The weather had changed abruptly, clouds rolling in, blocking the moon. The temperature had dropped sharply, making the air thick and heavy. A fog had started to creep in, swallowing the edges of the road. Even the trees that lined the highway seemed to lean in, their twisted branches reaching toward the car like gnarled fingers. Suddenly, the headlights flickered. Marcus cursed under his breath and tapped the wheel. The engine sputtered, the car lurching slightly as though it had been jolted awake. He tried the gas pedal again, but the engine died. The car coasted to a halt, the oppressive silence of the night closing in around them. "What's going on?" Claire asked, panic creeping into her voice. "I don't know. Let me check the engine," Marcus said, though his heart was pounding in his chest. He stepped out of the car, and immediately the cold night air hit him like a slap to the face. The fog was thicker now, swirling around him in strange, shifting patterns. It was as if the world had been swallowed whole, leaving him in a void. He opened the hood, his breath coming in visible clouds, but the engine was fine. Nothing looked out of place. "Marcus, get back in the car," Claire called, her voice strained with fear. His heart skipped a beat. He turned around to see her face pressed against the window, her eyes wide with terror. But there was something else, something behind her, something he couldn't quite place. A shadow moving too quickly for him to follow, crossing the car in the blink of an eye. It was gone before he could fully register it. "Claire," he called out, his voice shaky. "What's wrong?" The air around him grew heavier, the silence more suffocating. He felt a cold hand brush against the back of his neck, a chill that made his skin crawl. His breath came in shallow gasps as he hurried back to the car. The moment he slid into the seat, he noticed it. The trees, once only a vague outline against the dark sky, now stood like black monoliths. They seemed closer, their twisted branches blocking the road ahead, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed in the headlights. "Did you see that?" Claire whispered, her eyes wide. Marcus didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the road ahead, where, just beyond the light, a figure stood. It was a man, no, a shape shrouded in darkness. His body was impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally in the night. He stood motionless, his face hidden in shadow, as if he were waiting for something. "Who the hell is that?" Claire's voice cracked, her fear palpable. I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Stay down." The figure didn't move. It was as if it was rooted to the spot, watching them. Marcus tried to start the car again, but the engine refused to turn over. The sound of the starter motor clicking was the only thing that filled the air, sharp, deafening, like a gunshot in the quiet night. "Please no," Claire muttered, her eyes fixed on the figure. But then something changed. The figure's head slowly tilted upward, as though noticing them for the first time. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he saw it. The face. It wasn't human. There were no eyes, only hollow, black sockets that seemed to absorb the light around them. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight over the skull, and its mouth was open in an unnatural grin that seemed to stretch too wide for its face. Without thinking, Marcus slammed his foot onto the gas pedal. The car jerked forward, the tires screeching against the wet pavement, but it didn't move. The road was now a tunnel, the fog closing in, and the engine sputtered, as if it, too, had been seized by the presence of the figure. Suddenly, the world went silent. The fog vanished, and the darkness deepened, swallowing them whole. The trees on either side of the road were gone. The figure was gone. And yet, they weren't moving. "Why aren't we moving?" Claire gasped, her voice rising in panic. "Why aren't we?" Before Marcus could answer, there was a low thud, like something heavy had struck the car. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound came again, this time louder, followed by a slow, dragging scrape along the side of the vehicle. It was as though someone was crawling along the length of the car. "Marcus, do you hear that?" Claire's voice was barely audible, trembling. The air grew thick again, and the temperature plummeted. In the rearview mirror, Marcus saw movement. Shadows passed by the glass, too quick for him to focus on. But they were there, figures, more of them, coming closer with each passing second. And then Lily stirred in the back seat. The sound of her soft, sleepy murmurs was like a jolt to Marcus, snapping him out of the nightmare. "Mom! Dad! Where are we?" Lily asked, her voice small, as if she hadn't noticed the terror that had consumed her parents. But as Marcus turned to look at her, his blood ran cold. Lily's eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, but there was no life in them. They were black, empty, void of anything that could resemble a soul. Her mouth hung slightly open, but she didn't speak. Instead, the same wide, gaping grin that had haunted Marcus's nightmares stretched across her face. The same twisted, unnatural grin. "Lily!" Claire whispered, horror seizing her chest. But Lily didn't respond. The figure outside the car had returned, now standing at the passenger window. It was watching them, its hollow eyes fixated on Lily. Suddenly, the car jolted forward with a violent shake, throwing them all against their seatbelts. Marcus's heart stopped. The road stretched on, an endless ribbon of blackness. The fog, the figure, and even their own daughter, nothing was real. They were trapped, and they would never escape. The car continued to lurch forward as though guided by some invisible hand, but it wasn't moving along the road anymore. The highway had vanished entirely. All that surrounded them was an impenetrable darkness, thick and suffocating, like the inside of a tomb. Marcus could feel the pressure closing in on him, his chest tightening with every breath he took. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting. Claire's eyes never left Lily. Her hands, trembling, gripped the edge of the seat as if it would hold her to reality. But it wouldn't. Reality was slipping through her fingers like sand, and the nightmare around them had only just begun to tighten its grip. "Marcus!" Claire's voice was a desperate whisper. "What do we do? What's happening to her?" Lily's face had turned even paler, her mouth still frozen in that grotesque grin. The silence in the car was absolute, but Marcus could feel something pressing against him, pushing him deeper into the seat as though the air itself was being sucked out. He tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows wouldn't roll down either. They were sealed in, trapped. Then, a soft whisper, almost like a breath, drifted into the car. It wasn't coming from outside, but from inside the vehicle, from somewhere just behind him. The voice, faint and distorted, barely audible above the sound of his own heart racing, murmured one word: "Run." Marcus's blood ran cold. His head snapped around, but there was no one there. The voice had come from nowhere, from everywhere. But it was clear, it wasn't his mind playing tricks. Something was with them, watching them, waiting for them to understand the hopelessness of their situation. "Run, or it will take you all." The temperature plummeted further, and Marcus could see his breath fogging in front of him. The air had become thick, viscous, like they were moving through water. He could no longer feel the car's tires on the road, no longer hear the hum of the engine. It was as if they were floating in space, adrift on some strange, endless void. "Marcus!" Claire whispered again, her voice breaking. She turned to Lily. "Please, baby, please say something." But Lily didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the darkness outside the car. Her head tilted slightly to the side as if listening to something only she could hear. The smile on her face stretched unnaturally wide, too wide for a human face. It was a rictus, a macabre mockery of a smile. Suddenly, the car jolted forward once more, but it wasn't moving down the road. It was rising, lifting off the ground. Marcus's stomach lurched as gravity seemed to shift around them, the world tilting, spinning. The car was floating, suspended in the air as if it were weightless. "No! No, no, no!" Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with terror. The figures were back. All around them, they had gathered shadowy forms, some tall and thin, others squat and grotesque, their faces hidden in the same sickening darkness. They were closing in, slowly at first, their movements jerky, like marionettes pulled on strings too tight. There was no sound, no rustle of clothes or footfalls, only their eyes, empty black holes, staring in at them. And then, as if in response to Marcus's growing fear, the air seemed to distort, the shadows of the trees outside stretching impossibly long, their twisted branches now clawing at the car. "You will not leave." The voice was now loud, a chorus of whispers all coming from within the car. Marcus felt the vibrations of the words against his chest, an oppressive weight bearing down on him. His pulse hammered in his ears. "Marcus," Claire sobbed. "It's too late. We're already gone." Her voice cracked as if the words themselves were too much to bear. It's already over." Marcus couldn't answer. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on Lily, whose grin had widened further still, her mouth now stretching unnaturally, splitting the skin at the corners of her lips, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth that seemed to grow with each passing second. Her pupils had disappeared entirely, leaving only two empty black voids. She turned to face him then, her head jerking toward him with a sickening crack. "Daddy?" she rasped, her voice not her own but something deeper, older, layered with 1,000 voices. "Daddy, you left us." Before he could react, Lily's small hand shot out, gripping his wrist with an unnatural strength. The cold that radiated from her touch seeped into his skin, freezing him in place. He tried to pull away, but it was no use. The grip tightened, and as his fingers grew numb, he saw the shadows outside pressing closer, their shapes growing distorted, merging into one. Something began to fill the car, something viscous, a dark mist that oozed from the cracks in the windows, spilling over them like a tide. It was suffocating. It was alive. With a final, sickening tug, Lily's hand pulled at him, and the world exploded in a flash of blinding light. Then, there was nothing. No car, no highway, no fog. Just empty space. A void. And in the center of it, Marcus stood, weightless, his body suspended in the air, staring into the blackness. There were no stars, no ground beneath his feet. It was as though he had been pulled into the very heart of oblivion. And there, just out of his reach, was Claire, her body frozen in place, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her eyes were wide with terror, pleading for something he couldn't give. Lily's twisted form loomed behind her, a shadow, its grin widening into an impossibly large, gaping maw. "It's never over." The voices whispered all around him, their cold laughter surrounding him like a final embrace. The darkness tightened, the weight of it pressing against his chest, suffocating him. And then he understood. There was no escape. There was no end. Thank you for watching. Please support me and meet me in another video.